welcome. You're watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Adi Darami, and as ever, I have with me Mr. Momodu Mboj. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And before I delve into this week's program and tell you what we have, I must apologize. We didn't broadcast a program last week, and I'm grateful to all the people who stopped me on the street and asked me, are you all right? We're both all right, and we're back. So thank you for your kind consideration and worrying about our health. Nothing to worry about, honestly. And in case you're watching the program for the first time, we take 10 big stories from the week and we go through them in some detail. We talk about food safety. We talk about people attacking fire service people when they go to put out a fire. We talk about the government launching a really ambitious recruitment scheme. And also we hear from the ECOWAS Parliament and the West Africa Bar Association and what they had to say about human rights and also the impact of sanctions on people. So let's get cracking, shall we? First story, we all, I hope, eat food. And sometimes there are worries about where we get our food from. The FSQA, that's the Food Standards Quality Agency, they've been going out and they've been talking to some people who are very, very important to us. Have a look, have a listen.
And today we're in the market, we're promoting hygiene, good hygienic practices, because hygiene is a problem and it's key. Now, Codex Alimentarius is very significant. Gambia is an advisor to the Codex CC Africa bloc, and it's a big deal. So we're using this platform to promote hygiene.
Lalia, who is also the Codex contact point manager, implores the public to be mindful at all times about the food they consume.
You deal with it safely, you eat it safe, you get a safe outcome. That's what we have. Leka bi dafa wara set sela te suñu amé lolu dinañ am katan.
I couldn't have put it better myself. And before anybody writes in and saying, no, you got it wrong, I know it's the Food Safety and Quality Authority. I apologize for that. Better correct myself before we get a deluge of emails and text messages. Mr. Mboj, I'm one of these people who, there are certain markets I've stopped going to because I was concerned about food hygiene in those markets. Now we have the FSQA going, and they're making a difference. They're actually not just sitting around and issuing press releases. They're going to these markets and they're talking to people. We have to be pleased about that, surely.
Absolutely. Recently in Brikama, they have taken the bold step of actually shutting the place for a while until they could get their act together and the like. Of course, this is what we want from them. So, World Food Safety Day. But of course, how many times have we discussed this?
Indeed. The fact that they need to keep going there tells you something's not quite right, something's not working. Something's not
working. Is it the communication with people? Remember, we covered this ground during the drive time. Indeed. And we spoke to our correspondent.
That's right.
It was the FSQA.
That's right.
That was their advocacy, one of those advocacy campaigns, as it were, tours, And then with our reporter, and afterwards we said, how have the people responded when you look at people, our actual habits, selling food and the like? Have you seen any movement there, which is the crucial test? So unfortunately not.
Well, this is it. And there's a chap called Momodu Ba, who's, I think, the Director General of FSQA. And there's a clip which I was going to show, but I didn't want to show two clips from the same story. But what he was saying was that actually, what they're doing this time is they're going to the outdoor food vendors, street vendors, not just in markets, but actually out on the streets. He said because they're the ones that people buy from the most, and they're also the most difficult to police, to actually, monitor and deal with. And really, that is the crux of the matter. How can you go around, somebody selling Afra or whatever, how do you reach those people and how do you kind of get across the message to them about food hygiene?
Absolutely. And it's really the importance for being in an association. That is one of the ways really to organize any of these things, really, before you can get into any trade.
Sure.
you have to be part of an association.
Indeed.
So you begin to control things from that association sort of level, as it were, even to collect your taxes.
Well, indeed, yes, yes.
Wasn't it? We've seen this historically in other societies when, you know, when the socio-economic condition was like that. How do you bring sanity into it and the government to control?
Are you advocating that for these people who sell the food that we all consume, that there should be some sort of association that they should belong to, and that association then helps regulate, monitor, or whatever the case may be?
Absolutely, even if it's going to mean free, but you cannot offer any service to the public unless you belong to this association through which standards will be set. And when you give me service, I mean, poor service, where can I go for redress?
Indeed.
That's it, you will pay your taxes. So there are certain difficult, tough questions that we must take organizationally. You know, we're not reinventing the wheel. We've seen these things in other societies, how they were done historically. So how do you help people to bring sanity into this? I didn't know. I think that our governments have been distinctly lacking in imagination. So there's a lot of talk about investment and all of this, which is what we need, I feel.
What about the consumer? I mean, I vote with my feet in the sense that if you give me bad service or you sell me food in unhygienic conditions, I won't come there again. And yet the places that I've boycotted, I see lots of people still going there and still buying in these unhygienic conditions. So are we, in a sense, to blame that we're not putting our feet down and saying, you know, I will not come and buy here? Or is it that people have no choice?
The choices are not really that many. And creatures of habits, the way we are. And remember, I was just, because in preparing for this, I was put to mind, I just recalled, not long ago, we used to say stuff like, germs make black man fat.
Well, one of our colleagues, I won't name him, he says that every week.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, quite.
That's it. So that's the sort of stuff that we need to battle against. There's no such thing.
Of course.
But we had sort of just almost interiorized this self-loathing, but we don't see it as such, that it's really self-loathing. So it leads to all sorts of funny outcomes.
So we wish the FSQA well in their endeavors, and we hope that this will be something that they will crack down on. And as I said, the consumer, I can jump in my car and drive to another market. Not everybody has that choice. And so because of convenience, they just, if they can walk to a market, they'll walk to the market. They won't go somewhere else. But something needs to be done.
Absolutely. The institutional reform we are talking about, it's going to look like something like that. You know that any reform, you have to be pulling people, screaming and kicking.
They don't go willingly.
They do not go willingly. So when you hear people talk about institutional reform, then you begin to wonder, do they actually mean it? Do they know what price they're going to have to pay and the opposition they're going to face? Do they actually, are they sure? Well, we'll see.
We shall see, indeed. I think that's a good note to end on. So there you have it. There's a lot of work and a lot to chew on, pun intended, by the way. And now on to our second story. This is something that's always perplexed me, even when I was living in England. You would hear on the news on a regular basis, the fire service went to attend to a fire and they were attacked. Youths from the community in Croydon, in wherever, in Brixton, stoning the fire service people. I've never been able to understand it. I've come to the Gambia, I still don't understand it. Have a look.
We from the fire department, on behalf of the chief fire officer and the entire management and staff of the fire department, would like to seize this opportunity to kindly condemn this act or the repetition of this form of behavior, because it is not telling well about our country. We are a peace-loving nation, and we are a nation that is called friendly and smiling faces. Fire engines that come to the Gambia are a sole donation from our Avon counterparts. And it will be very disheartening and sad from their end to understand that the donated materials to the Gambia, free of charge, are being vandalized by Gambians themselves.
There we heard, not only are the fire engines being vandalized, as he said. Mind you, I thought it was quite cute that he said we would kindly condemn. I think we should strongly condemn this sort of activity and these sorts of actions, Mr. Mboj. But interestingly, even though individuals are injured. The accent there was on the damage to the machinery, because as he said, it's an embarrassment that we get given this stuff and then we ourselves are the ones wrecking it. But have you ever been able to comprehend why people attack the fire service? We can get into this specific one and I'll elaborate on what people said as to why it happened, but have you ever been able to grasp this?
Let me give you this anecdote. You know, the way you introduced even this whole story, saying that in Brixton, or was it in Croydon?
Croydon and Brixton.
That's it, you see that. And then over here, I remember way back in the 1970s, we had this Director of Information at the Ministry of Information, called Marcel Tomasi.
Right.
He said, when you watch these things on TV and what Western students or sort of aggrieved groups, what they do, maybe throwing stones, perhaps they live in an economy that can really afford to revamp things, that can afford to repair things quickly and the like. But over here, you can't afford that.
Which is true.
You cannot do that, really. We are in a different situation here. And there are many ways of expressing my anger, my dissatisfaction, apart from resorting to violence.
Yeah. And in this particular instance, what happened was that in Jeshwang, the fire service, people said they came too late. And we've heard this a lot. But in this case, we were told that the nearest fire station to them was attending to a fire somewhere else already. And so they had to get one from somewhere else. But of course, people didn't wait for that explanation. They didn't even care if there was an explanation. As soon as they saw it arrive, they started pelting it, saying, you're late, you're late, you're late.
To my mind, it was very funny. That was the whole, the curious thing about it, because apparently they were outraged because this thing had come late. Yet by their actions, you're prolonging the delay.
Quite.
Extraordinary logic there.
It's bizarre.
And we've been seeing this, I think, since the change of government in Uganda. There is a certain faction, a certain underbelly. You know, we talk about the demographic change and all of that. You'll have a lot of youth, young people doing wonderful things and the like. But again, that will be this underbelly that we need to deal with. You know, I call them the sort of self-righteous layabouts. They're all over the place, just looking for something to be outraged about. That's it. And very quickly, first port of call, the nearest stone or whatever, and whenever they have an opportunity to loot, they will go and loot.
This is it.
So we must be prepared for this. We call it underbelly of sort of this bulge, youth bulge. Absolutely.
Because, you know, as you said at the beginning of that, you know, they were coming to deal with whatever was left of the fire. They could have mitigated some of the damage if you'd allowed them, you know, because as we were told, the fire was still burning. It hadn't been put out. And it had, you know, had not been extinguished, and they were going to come and extinguish it. And you're stopping them because you say they got there late. Well, you know, there's no sense in you stopping them, attacking them, and then, of course, they can't do anything because they're fleeing for their lives. And two officers were wounded and had to be taken to hospital.
So we need to have a realistic appraisal of our situation right now. That is why sometimes when I listen to hotheads, really activists who call themselves journalists, whipping up this sort of like acrimony, hatred, I don't know, whipping up really disagreeable, as it were, feelings about this is being incompetent, this is that, constantly blaming, condemning, never anything productive, then you whip up this crazy sense and people begin to take these kids, especially we have so many young people, you know, some of us certain grown-ups need to sort of provide some kind of leadership. You know, really, we don't want to turn this into a kind of cult of youth when they hadn't really had time to learn from their elders before you can take over. That's how civilization works, as it were. So we are in this trouble for a while. So because it was scandalous, these young people pelting them, choosing students. Why? Because we are angry that they didn't come on time.
And
please.
interesting was that the people who came and apologized were not the young people, they were the elders.
Absolutely. I noted that down. I said, I was quite curious. It was the elders who came. They quite felt there's a breakdown.
This is it. And it wasn't the elders who were pelting. It was the youth. It should have been the young people who came and apologized.
Oh my God.
For the terrible behavior.
When we were in my youth,
Yeah.
I mean, any kid do whatever. Any adult around will come and ask you to stop. In fact, just by being there, you'll be scared to do certain things.
Quite so.
That's all gone now.
It's gone.
It's all completely gone.
Gone. And you know, and for me, again, you know, I know this is not related to this particular story, but honestly, this is something that I'm going to bang on about till Gambians get bored of hearing me say. In most of the fire incidents, Mr. Mboj, that we've covered, we have heard from the fire service that they were not able to get to the fire because people were not able to direct them properly. Absolutely. Because we don't have streets that are named.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, this is unforgivable in 2022 that the fire brigade can say, oh, the person who was on the phone wasn't good at giving directions. By the time we found out where they were talking about, it was too late. It needs to stop. And it's a simple remedy. Just give the bloody street's name and the person can say, I'm on so-and-so streets. I'm standing on Mamadou Mboj Street. They'll be there. You know, not by the mango tree that's next to the overturned container or all that kind of rubbish. You know, and so honestly, in so many of the stories that I have covered since I've been editor here at QTV, the fire brigade have said to us, we got there late because they weren't able to give us proper directions. Come on.
It is as if, I mean, this was rocket science.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I wish I could genuinely test the fire brigade.
You know,
I really want to test it.
Quite.
I mean, it seems so simple. I mean, when we were kids, we took that for granted.
Indeed.
When we had street names,
Yeah,
we took stuff for granted, and suddenly we are being told that it is actually not that simple.
If the rest of the world can do it, why can't we?
Have we regressed? Because we could do it earlier on,
Right.
and suddenly it has become such a huge,
Massive
formidable problem. Extraordinary what's been happening to us.
Yes, when I did research, I found out there are 1.7 million street names in America. That's almost as many people as there are in Gambia. And they've managed to do it. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. But, you know, on the most serious note about the fire service, I think these kind of attacks need to stop because they're not helping anybody, at least of all the people whose few belongings might have been saved.
Absolutely. And you need us ordinary folks to be confronting these people and say, no, you are not going to do that.
Right. If I'm a parent and I see my child doing that, I will scold you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Only with that, really, without that general acceptance, we are told, you can never really enforce anything.
At all. Thank you for that. And now on to our third story. And this is quite a bold one. And one of the phrases I've been using a lot since I came to the Gambia is, this could be a game changer. This really could be. What am I talking about? E-recruitment. Have a look.
All ministries and departments of the government will only be able to use the PSC e-recruitment portal to hire employees from grade 3 to grade 11.
This pronouncement by the Minister for the Public Service, Babukar Juf, ushers in a new era in the drive to transform the public sector by digitalizing government recruitment systems. With the introduction of this new portal, developed by a Gambian-based company, Nifty ICT Solutions, those seeking government jobs no longer need to apply in person or endure the struggle of having to travel long distances to apply or make inquiries about their applications. Minister Juf says this is part of government's drive to promote transparency.
To promote transparency. Mr. Mboj, I said in the intro to that, a game changer. Working in Britain, they've been using that system for over 20 years. But those who use it have grown up in a culture where it is expected, even when you're at school, you're taught how to use e-recruitment systems. We're just kind of bringing it on, bolting it on. And what I didn't play in that clip is that it says this starts with immediate effect. They're not phasing anything in. It is with immediate effect. Are we ready for it?
This is exactly the key. They actually thought about it in such terms. Really, you need preparation, as it were, before you can. We just hope that this current climate of being zealot zealous
Yeah, go ahead.
for reform and change. So we are pushing, thrusting forward. But we know how these things can be. You can go on for a while, but at some point, reality will force it to stop.
Sure.
And then, you know, what do they say? Less haste, more speed.
And less haste.
Less haste. Something like that.
Yes.
So we hope not. We know that when you introduce a new system, you will normally have to suffer this sort of teething problems. How prepared are they?
Yes, because I've seen when, you know, colleagues here have been trying to apply for something like a visa. For many of these European countries, they want you to file stuff online. You have to attach this document, and that document. And it's a similar thing. You have to attach a scanned copy of your certificate, your TIN, the actual application. You might even have to fill in online and so on. This is all new stuff. And you know, yes, it's all well and good saying that, you know, government, but this has come from out of nothing almost, and bam, you've introduced this system.
Absolutely.
It's going to be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I say covering what people in grades 3 to 11. I wonder potentially what's the number there. So this is it. We've expressed the fear that are we really ready? We had not heard about any pilot. Often you do have these pilot sort of introductions, as it were, to see how it will work. Maybe they might have been doing it and the like. So we'll have to see what happens here.
Sure. I mean, my one sort of positive hope is that we live with a kind of tech-savvy generation of young people. So perhaps this might be something that's like falling off a log for them, and we have no need to worry.
Absolutely, and you have to introduce these things. Of course, in the beginning, it wouldn't be perfect.
Sure.
You know, we will complain about all sorts of things, but just be honest and implement honestly.
Because if I can just elaborate on it, once you've done the application, you can then track electronically the process of your application. So you give in a number or a reference, and with that reference, you type it in, and it can tell you how it's proceeding. Have you been accepted? Have you been rejected? Are you going to be called back? Etc. etc. And it's none of you phoning somebody, it's kind of dodgy, and saying, you know, did you get my piece of paper? And you know. You can track it, and so can everybody else.
That's it. And you learn by doing, isn't it? So let's just move on. Yeah. You reserve the right to make your own mistakes. Sure. Just be responsive to these mistakes. For me, my worry is I hope that we implement to the full, not just start halfway, you know, the implementation issue.
It would never work.
So hopefully with this technology now, that will restrict the discretionary stuff, too much discretionary stuff, that's the problem. So none of the discretionary stuff, you have to follow procedures and processes, that's how it works.
We shall see. Time will be the judge. Thank you for that, Mr. Mbodj. Now on to our fourth story. The ECOWAS Parliament wrapped up on Thursday in Abuja after 3 weeks of sitting, which our poor colleague Aliou Cisse sat through every second of those sittings. However, it wasn't all boring, really, I have to be honest. And he tells me this was one of the ones that really concentrated minds. What was it? Well, it was a report by the West African Bar Association to the Parliament. And they had some very interesting things to say, such as, have a look.
Oraka said the sanctions imposed on the countries by ECOWAS are biting deeply and socio-economic rights of citizens are in shambles. She recommended, among other things, for ECOWAS to have an honest conversation around manipulation of constitution to enable Exxon to stay in office.
And sorry for being caught unawares there. But there you heard our colleague Aliou Cisse there reporting from Abuja. And Mr. Mbodj, what we heard from the West Africa Bar Association was that they were addressing the Parliament and they wanted them to stop and think. They said, you think you're punishing these military boys by imposing sanctions, but actually they're not the ones suffering. It's the populations in these countries, Somali, Guinea-Conakry, and Burkina Faso. And apparently the debate then got quite sort of interesting, because then people started thinking, well, perhaps we hadn't thought of that. Well, which is kind of curious.
Well, this is the old dilemma, isn't it? Remember during apartheid, those who said no to sanctions, this is exactly what they were saying, that
right.
ordinary people will suffer and all the rest of
That's
it.
right. The
But
people at the top won't suffer. It will be the ordinary people. It's exactly the same.
But still, everybody said, we need that's it.
And those of us who could boycott goods, we boycotted those goods.
That's absolutely.
It's true.
So there's something that it does.
Yes. Well, indeed. And I mean, because what was interesting about the debate, obviously we haven't got time to play the whole 4.5 hours of the debate, but some people were saying that sanctions don't work. But we've seen instances when sanctions do work.
Yes.
So, but why do people always kind of trumpet this thing about sanctions don't work? They say, oh, it's better to bring them on side and talk nicely to them and they will change. But sometimes people don't change. And you do need to sanction them and let them feel the pain of the sanction.
That's absolutely it. So I like the fact that the barristers, the association, what they've also suggested, that perhaps try to deal with the sources of this conflict.
Indeed.
These leaders trying to manipulate constitution so that they can prolong, as it were, their rule. That's exactly it. So they want to refocus it.
Sure.
Instead of being reactive, essentially, with the sanctions, you're being reactive.
Sure.
Why not be more proactive and then tell these people never to sort of seek to extend their stay beyond the mandate,
well,
please?
This is it. And yes, I mean, because this discontent arises out of something. It's not in a vacuum. You know, there's a reason why we've had coup d'etats. And if you look at the causes on almost all of them, they're almost identical. You know, as you said, you know, people gerrymandering the constitution to get another extra term, or you know, nepotism and so on, things that have been around forever. But you know, as long as they are a cause for discontent. And so, of course, people, you know, sometimes they welcome the military when they step in.
So when these coups take place, they define it as sort of unconstitutional methods.
Indeed.
And I'll ask you, do you think that the order, the ancient regime, was constitutional?
This is it.
So we are in a bind here.
If you tamper with the constitution,
absolutely,
you're being unconstitutional.
You are being unconstitutional.
Indeed.
So this is, I mean, the coups that we're seeing, they are not causes of anything. I think they're epiphenomenal. They're effects of something else.
Indeed.
They are not causes of anything. So I think we make that mistake. Let's go back to the sources. Otherwise, we'll keep on having the military intervening in politics.
This is it.
Directly.
And we don't want that, because we know where that can lead. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj.
Absolutely.
And now on to something else. In most African countries, they have all sorts of protocols around disability. Here in the Gambia, had the recently rejected draft constitution gone through, again, it would have been quite something for disability rights in the Gambia in what it tried to enshrine. And for me, the rejection of that constitution, that was the thing I felt the most, because it would have been groundbreaking and it would have set Gambia apart from many other African countries. However, people aren't taking it lying down. They are complaining, and they're complaining loudly about the ineffectual way that disability rights are being implemented here in the Gambia. Have a look, have a listen.
The African Disability Protocol addresses overwhelmingly about women and girls with disabilities. An African Disability Protocol also explicitly addresses the issue of harmful practices that are often exercised upon persons with disabilities on the African continent.
Bafu Jeng, a senior state counsel at the Ministry of Justice, said although the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, UNCRPD, is the first comprehensive human rights treaty of the century, it does not address the unique challenges in the way the African Disability Protocol does. She adds that the protocol builds on the rights enshrined in the UNCRPD and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but uses a right-based approach and is more detailed and illustrative in representing the uniqueness of the African context.
I hope viewers were paying attention there, because there's something that is said in there. The African Disability Protocol actually goes beyond the kind of disability protocols that exist in other parts of the world. They have Africanized it. They have made it so that it's relevant to us, because we have things like FGM that most of the rest of the world doesn't have. And so they've incorporated it into that. And yet, Mr. Mboj, for the many countries that have ticked a box and say we've signed it, we've had meetings where we've validated it. As Magistrate Krubali has said time and time again, almost nothing has been done to implement. Why do we keep going and hearing this over and over again?
Absolutely, the bespoke, wasn't it? This was the bespoke instrument for Africa. And for us in the Gambia, quite interesting, isn't it? What kind of protocol is it? It's a protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Banjul Charter.
Exactly.
What an extraordinary, how ironic there to the Banjul Charter. So this is it. We need 15 member states to ratify it, for it to come into force.
Sure.
What do we have? 10 signatories?
Yes.
Only one. Ratified it.
Right.
So it tells you,
the seriousness that is. And yet when you go to these countries, they say, we care about disability rights. But this gives a lie to that, because you don't care. Because if you did, you would ratify this.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Totally.
So always the actions constantly betray, as they were, or they belie, what we say.
I mean, I've sat in the office and we've been watching something in England or recently in Rwanda, where somebody who wasn't from Rwanda but was speaking at the Chogum, disabled person. And somebody said, quite just not in any nasty way, said, gosh, listen to that lady. If she was that disabled and in the Gambia, there's no way she would get to that platform where she's addressing the world. And that said a lot, actually. And that says how much or how little we pay to disability rights and disabled people.
That's it. And when we say, and even when we say disability, what exactly do we mean?
Quite. Yes.
It's quite extraordinary.
Because sometimes we play with words. We start saying differently abled and so on.
Absolutely.
But if you say disabled, like you said, what do we mean? What categories are you talking about? There are different types of disability.
You see, we use all these euphemisms, as it were. As somebody once said, oh, look at the poor. They've acquired a fine collection of nomenclature, but their situation is still the same. So these marketing people can go around rebranding, playing around with concepts, but the reality remains the same, really. So this is the key. And the reason why we've got the protocol, because Africa, the peculiar attitudes towards some of these the social issues.
Yes.
That's all I'm going to say. This person, that person. This is it. So you have to confront that. That was what they meant by it being bespoke, tailor-made to our situation, because of the normative stuff in the background that you have to deal with if you're going to have to sort it out. Change conduct, behavior.
So, I mean, the government and others who, in some cases, are named as the authorities who take this through, do it, and the world will recognize you, and you get a lot of kudos for it. So it needs to be done, and of course people need to have their rights respected. So thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to something else. We talk about involvement of the citizens. In fact, I just looked down and realized that was our 5th story. And so let's go for a quick commercial break, and when we come back we will have 5 more stories.
As the fastest growing GSM company in the Gambia, QCell has the widest 4G plus coverage in the country, 3 times faster internet speed than our competitors. So switch now and dial *335# and enjoy what true 4G feels like. QCell, the Gambia's trusted network.
QMoney, the biggest mobile money service in the Gambia, has taken mobile banking to the next level. Now, you can link your QMoney wallet with your bank account. Yes, link your Ajib or EcoBank accounts with your QMoney wallet and get instant access to your cash anytime. No need to queue at the bank anymore. Transfer funds from your bank account to your wallet or your wallet to your bank account using QMoney Bank Link is the fastest, most secure and convenient way to transfer funds between your wallet and bank account. For more information, call our customer care on 133. Q Money, Sunyu Kalpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome, and if you're just tuning in, welcome back as well. You are watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review with myself, Ari Darami, and my co-host, Mr. Mamadou Mboj. Mr. Mboj, we had 5 cracking stories, and thank you for your interjection so far. Now on to 5 more, and the 6th story of the evening. We hear all the time about citizens getting involved in all sorts of things. But what about citizens getting involved in fiscal matters that the government are involved in? A new one on you? Have a look, have a listen.
It's biannual, like I said. 2019 we didn't do well, but in 2021 we have seen some level of improvement that have been registered. We've scored 35 out of 100, so from 4 to 35 at 31 point that have been scored for the Gambia, and as a result, Gambia has been, identified as the top transparency improver. But that does not mean to say that we are the best in terms of transparency, but in terms of the increment that has been registered.
Best in terms of improvement, but still not the best. But what I listened, and I actually wish I had been at that event, because essentially what they were saying was that countries were marked on how much they consult with their populations, including around things like the budget. How does government consult with citizenry around the budget?
That's a very, very interesting score there. And public participation, we scored 9 out of 100.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely woeful. So we
way down.
Hardly way down.
Yeah.
So the 35 over 100 that Matt was referring to there,
yes,
that's the transparency
that's
index,
right.
as it were, because they sort of divided up into different categories.
Yep.
And you've got even the budget oversight element.
Yes.
That's 52 over 100.
Over 100,
that's it.
Just
And it's been improving.
Yes.
Absolutely, that is true. I mean, what we've been saying in past years, things were much worse.
Yeah,
so we are seeing some improvement,
that's right,
even with the National Audit Office.
Yes, indeed.
A lot remains to be desired,
This is it. And I did wonder when we were talking about the scrutiny that I think, because when I watched the piece, I was thinking the kind of scrutiny they're asking for, something like select committees holding government ministries and government directorates to account would be one way, because these are elected officials. But other than that, I'm not sure how the public can get involved in the kind of scrutiny of kind of fiscal matters. It would be a really difficult one to get across.
Oh, absolutely. All we can do is sort of be part of the debate,
sure,
asking the right questions.
Yes.
And then the possibility of really, we tend to have our own when it comes to elections,
sure,
being a pressure force, a lobby force, in all the ways that actually democracies work.
Sure. Indeed.
It's really about civil society that strengthens democracy.
Sure.
It's never from the government.
No.
The government will always try to take away your democracy. We all know that.
Everywhere.
Yeah. See, some people really, it's people who make democracies work, not the government. I disagree.
So it will be very interesting to see if we can improve on that score for the next time round that they come with the International Budget Partnership, who are the ones who did this.
Absolutely.
This survey.
To National Assembly.
Yes.
What the civil society, what they're doing.
Yeah, quite.
Journalists.
Yes.
What we're doing, disseminating it. So this is this sort of multi-pronged attack or defense.
Well, indeed, because in terms of transparency, when you've had a culture of secrecy around just about everything, how do you then become transparent and even tell people that they should be transparent when, and again, I go back to the access to information, if and when that starts functioning, it'll be interesting to see whether people use that to actually apply a certain level of scrutiny to the work of government. That would be quite an interesting one.
Absolutely. So, and we know it's going to be a very slow learning curve.
Indeed.
That's it on all sides.
Yes. So get ready to go back to school.
Get ready to go back to school. That's exactly
sure.
it. That's where we are.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to something completely different. Many people had been looking forward to the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. And then COVID-19 came along and slashed the numbers that were allowed. First of all, nobody was allowed for the first year of COVID. And then slowly the Saudis this year have started letting in people from outside the kingdom, including some from the Gambia. But it wasn't always smooth sailing or smooth flying. Have a look, have a listen.
Lion Air A330 left the Gambia just after midnight on Saturday with over 400 pilgrims. The pilgrims are registered with 9 Gambian Hajj operators accredited by the Gambia Hajj Commission in collaboration with the local government ministry. After a long 8-hour flight, the pilgrims finally arrived at the Abdul Aziz International Airport in the holy city of Medina. At the Abdul Aziz International Airport, all pilgrims went through strict COVID-19 procedures, documentation, passport, medical and vaccination checks before boarding buses to their respective hotels in Medina.
The end bit there, they went through strict COVID-19 precautions. These still need to be applied. Just on, when was it? On Friday, I was reading that in England, there's been a spike in cases, and they point to something like the Glastonbury Festival, where you had, I don't know, 500,000 people, and nobody wearing a mask. And they're saying that these are the sort of things. So there's a danger here, isn't there, where you have people from all over the world converging on Medina and Mecca. COVID-19 still hasn't quite gone away.
Absolutely. So you're gonna have these different responses, as it were. There's this fatigue setting, isn't it? So just depending on the circumstances. So here, yes, of course, as long as, according to the WHO, we all been following WHO, COVID-19, the pandemic is still on. Sure. Then we have to take these precautions. It only stands to common sense, really.
So yes, and we heard our colleague Babukar Sise, who of course has gone, and of course reduced numbers, just over 500 from the Gambia, I think 1,000 from Sierra Leone. So quite small numbers compared to the social numbers that used to go before. But you know, we wish them well. We hope everybody goes back and goes there and comes back safely.
Absolutely,
really.
Much better than not having anybody allowed in.
Well, indeed,
so,
yes.
so really, tough luck, unfortunate for those who couldn't make it. But you know,
we wish them well.
We wish them well for next time.
Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Now, Radio Gambia, national broadcaster, celebrated 60 years of existence, and we were there. Have a look.
Malik Jeng, the Director General of GRTS, said the newsroom at Radio Gambia has become a reputable school of journalism, which over the years has trained most of the best journalists and news writers in the country.
The likes of Peter Gomez of West Coast Radio, Ibrahim G. Sankare, currently the government spokesman, the late Edmond Thomas, Lawyer Lamin Dabo of Dabanani, Mr. Amadou Skater Jane, Mr. Musa Silla, currently working with the Islamic Development Bank, and Mr. Mahdi Jubate of Tango.
And I have a kind of cheeky reason for mentioning that. My father was once Minister of Information and Broadcasting, and so I was quite thrilled that this August institution has actually celebrated 60 years. So quite a feat and quite an existence, and you know, congratulations to them, by the way.
Absolutely.
So what are your memories of?
Big, fantastic stuff. When we were kids, and to the list there that Malik Jeng gave, I'm going to add people like Joy Cooker. Right. I think he forgot a bit about the women there, Jana Banyang. Yeah. I mean, the 1 o'clock news at 1 o'clock. So, and we used to use Radio Gambia to polish our language
yes.
up. We learned
that's something I was going to come
from
yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yes, and he mentioned Edmund Thomas, there was Sol Jai in sports, yes. Lamin Barambuch, right. So the older guard. So absolutely, huge, monumental kind of a presence.
Yes, indeed. And older people have spoken to me and told me about the impact it had on them when they were the only ones around. And so you had to listen to them. And what they talked about was the quality. And they said, oh, you know, when you tune in and you kind of skirt across the dial now, the quality is so variable and in some cases so poor. But then you had just the one, and the quality was very good.
It was a bit like BBC, that wreath concept of public broadcasting.
Sure.
That was it. So because afterwards you had Chosani Gambian, people like Alaji Mansour, and others, Alaji Mansour Njai, and then others, and Cham Juf, you know, the historian or historian. So you had these people. So we were using it to learn, to educate ourselves, you know what I mean, through independence.
Yes.
So it was a huge medium, it's part of that liberated,
yes, indeed.
you know, independent Gambianness. That was part of the identity-forming instruments.
Excellent, and as I said, once again, we wish them a happy 60th. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. 2 more stories to go. Now, the next one, World Vitiligo Day, was commemorated recently here in the Gambia. Well, I say commemorated, it was... Anyway, I won't spoil it. Have a look.
This year, the day is commemorated on the theme, Learning to Live with Vitiligo. To the dismay of the organizers, people with vitiligo did not attend the launching of the association. The founder of the Vitiligo Association, Buba Jammeh, says people are not willing to come out due to discrimination and stigmatization. He says the aim of the association is to help people living with the skin disorder. He explains.
2009, late 2009, early 2010, I started seeing some white patches on my skin, and which was very difficult, very confusing, because I didn't know what it was. And then I was asked to go and see my GP, which is the doctor. And when I went there, I was told I got vitiligo, and I don't know what vitiligo was. And I was asked to embrace that it's going to spread more and more.
There we had the gentleman who came up with the idea for the Gambia Vitiligo Association of the Gambia. And I said I didn't want to spoil it, and the bit was at the beginning where it says that people with the condition didn't attend. And he then said in the piece that they were kind of worried about attending. I mean, why are we still in this position where it's a medical condition that you have no control over? Why should people feel still stigmatized and afraid to come out?
When I heard this, I said, God, that's an indictment on the whole society.
It really
Whether
is.
we realize that
It
or
really
not,
is.
it's really telling us something. Yes, I couldn't believe it. But again, perhaps not many people have much information about it. I can just take my own experience growing up in Banjul. You used to see people with
Who
this
had
discoloration, the
yes,
patches,
the patches,
yes. But we sort of attributed that to perhaps an incident where they were burned. They had
For many people, that's what they start to think, because there are people who have had burns, and that has been the extent where the pigmentation is gone, and there are white patches or lighter patches than their normal skin color.
So perhaps that information, that awareness is important for me, especially now. I hold out hope with this simple idea that the biggest chunk of our population, they are all young. I happen to think that it's easier.
Sure.
This is also an opportunity in that sense. It depends on how well we use it.
Yes.
It might be, if we tap into it.
I was going to come to that, and in fact the angle I was going to come to is slightly different, but it was to do with the young and to do with the use of the internet.
Yes.
When we had some young people come and visit our studios on the previous weekend, I asked them, you know, how much they use their smartphones for research. And I was a bit horrified, because 3 of them in the group of 35 said they wanted to be journalists. And it turned out they didn't use it much for research. And so I just wondered whether, if I hear somebody mention vitiligo and I have a smartphone, I thought, okay, let me go on a search engine. Vitiligo, what is it? Let me learn about it. Let me find out some more about it. So those young people who are depending on to kind of take the reins of the society and the country in years ahead, this is what they should be doing. And then if you do that, you don't have these prejudices and these misconceptions about people who have certain medical conditions.
Remember when we were younger, that natural curiosity to have facts in our heads. It wasn't about And what I felt like doing, you know, what really sort of tickles my fancy, this inclination, there were certain things that I needed to know, whether I liked it or not.
I was telling my colleague, Jennifer
like
Sonko, on a related discussion, I said when I was growing up, if you didn't see me on the football field, I was in the library.
Absolutely.
And, you know, lucky for us, we had a fantastic library in Freetown where I grew up. And so I spent a lot of time there. But now you don't need to go to a library. The library is at your fingertips. And yet I don't see people having that kind of hunger, that thirst, that searching for knowledge. And I find it perplexing. Perhaps it's because they've grown up with it and they've kind of taken it for granted, whereas my generation, we never had it. And so we're kind of grateful and we're welcome. And we love it. You know.
Depending on how you see it, some people call it about history, the cunning of history or the cunning of reason. Quite interesting. We didn't have the technology, but there was that desire. The mental element was strong. It was there.
This is it.
Now they've got the technology. They take it for granted. That's not really that important anymore. I was talking to somebody the other day. He said, now really what we valorize as a society is just the material rewards of things. So wanting to learn for its own sake, what are you talking about? You must be an alien. It's all about what I can see. It's the car.
Will it make me rich?
The big house will make me rich. So that is what, to be blessed, that's what it means.
Sure.
Can you imagine what kind of society, when you believe in that, what actions that would lead you to?
One shudders. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Imagine we started with vitiligo and look where we ended up. It takes us to our final story, and there is a relation. And why do I say that? Because we are talking about what has happened to what we used to call the African art of storytelling. Some people are not giving up without a fight. Have a look.
Sira Sonko is a participant at the National Storytelling Competition and belongs to a new generation, most of whom benefit little or not at all from the joys and lessons of storytelling. Sira is not happy about the present-day diminishing of oral storytelling tradition.
As I am speaking to you right now, I am not comfortable with that, because it is not something which is advisable. And in life, in any aspect of it you do, there are two things, which is the advantage and the disadvantage. So at this point, it is very disadvantageous to us young ones, the upcoming ones in general.
Aware of the significance of storytelling in our society, the Young Writers Association of the Gambia has mobilized children from different schools for the first ever national storytelling competition to inspire a commitment to telling stories about ourselves.
No apologies. I absolutely love this story. For the simple fact, Mr. Mboj, I love storytelling. I grew up in a household where my grand aunt, my grandmother's sister, Auntie Vivian, from the time we got to Sierra Leone and she was looking after us at the house where my grandmother lived, every night she would tell us a story. But cleverly, she would say, I will only tell you a story if you finish your homework. And because she was such a brilliant storyteller, we would finish our homework and then we would sit on the ground, spellbound. She was a brilliant storyteller. I mentioned this in the office and people were like, what on earth are you talking about? We've heard about this kind of stuff. But it made me slightly depressed. So I was thrilled when I heard that these people were putting this on. What are your own experiences of that kind of thing?
Absolutely. That's with me, my experience anyway in Banjul. It used to be with us kids in the evening after dinner, we'll all sit outside, in the yard. And then, and we'll be telling stories, as it were, one to the next, to the other, taking turns, rotating, taking turns and telling stories to each other. Absolutely. I mean, how do you bring up your kids without stories?
Indeed.
How do you form an identity? Who we are? You are your stories. We are creatures of language.
Right. And you know, when I said this in the office, and you know, for some of the younger ones, for all of them who've grown up without this, they were like, "But how do we start?" I said, you know, take for example the story of your own family. Get the youngest ones and tell them the story as much as you know about your own family. Where did your great-grandparents meet? Where did they come from? Suddenly you're a storyteller. And that will, so the next time they see their grandparent or great-grandparent, they have this fantastic image and knowledge about them that they didn't have because you've told them a story. You can tell stories about anything and everything.
Your whole identity, who you are, it's all about the stories.
That's correct.
So this is it. It's just sometimes that I will quibble with certain notions, certain concepts like orality. I said, well, I'm not sure whether Africans, we own orality.
Yeah.
I think humanity generally owns orality.
Sure.
I think but the written word was invented at a particular period, so we started writing them. We are also part of this written, as it were, world. So yes, I have this romantic, as it were, relationship, affinity, if you like, with orality, but yet I'm part of modernity where we write things. So it's not all doom and gloom. Let us read stories to our children. This is modernity. This is what happens before you go to bed. Bedtime stories. Fantastic. It does a similar stuff. So now move on to read bedtime stories to your kids. It's the same tradition, really.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. And if anybody's watching this program, but you don't normally watch the QTV news, try and watch the news, because that is what I tell the journalists every day when they go out. Try and tell a story. Thank you for watching. Sternberg, thank you for your interventions.
It's my pleasure.